Welcome to the Freedom Fridays podcast. With me, your host, Pete Clark, the Whispers guy. Work seems to expand to the time that we give it. And I've been investing my time, occasionally on a Friday, to explore how we use our time, our energy, our attention, and the impact it has on our identity. I've been exploring over season 1 some of the mindset shifts in the handcuffs of I have to the freedom of I choose to. And I've shared some conversations, some tips, some tools about how you might want to invest your own time, your own energy, your own attention. How you might want to, if you choose to, make some changes to your identity. How you might have freedom from I have to and design a life around I choose to. If that's of interest to you, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to this week's edition of the Freedom Fridays podcast, where I have a new guest, somebody I haven't really met before and really chatted to yet. We have Tash. Hi, Tash.
Hello. Thanks for having me, even
You're
though we
welcome.
have not spoken much yet.
Yeah. Now, you're calling in from New Zealand, right?
Yes, Bay of Plenty, New Zealand. One of the best regions here, I would say.
Yeah, if any of you haven't been to New Zealand or haven't been to the Bay of Plenty, prepare to be stunned that you might want to live there for the rest of your life, is my experience.
Yes.
So thanks for coming on, Tash. I believe in doing a little bit of research that you have a little bit of a voice online and reputation for having some spicy opinions about leadership, life, corporate world, etc., etc. If you're okay, maybe that's how we'll start. What's a kind of medium spiced opinion you have about leadership?
Oh, medium spiced. Oh gosh, throw me. I was thinking of like the other one.
Well, is the other one, is it mild or is it
I guess it's a bit
triple chili?
spicier. I mean, maybe people would consider this medium, but I would say like leadership isn't hard, and I talk about this quite often where a lot of people talk about leadership being really hard. It's this hard thing that we need to navigate. It's this hard thing that I need to figure out and learn and all these things. And I kind of strip it back and I have this just blunt way of saying it's actually not that hard. If we listen more than we talk, leadership can actually be really fundamentally simple. And I'm not going to say easy, but it can be simpler, where if we listened more, instead of assuming, instead of having the ego in the way, instead of trying to control, to direct, to know it all, we would actually have such simpler experiences as we navigate through work, through life, through our interactions and relationships with people. And I think that fundamentally comes down to listening more. Like, are we listening enough to what people are saying, to what they're experiencing, to what they're feeling, and then deciding how we respond and move with that? And and I teach leadership, I coach on leadership, and I teach all of the skills, but fundamentally every single skill that I teach comes back to how much are you listening before you use or apply that skill? And often that's not happening enough, which adds all of the complications around it that makes it really hard, makes it really challenging. And when I talk about leaders, I'm not talking about only people in positions of management, in an organization. We're all leaders in some way. We all have the ability to influence the people around us. And that's how I see leaders, right? They have the ability to influence. They have that power to influence. And are we listening enough to the people around us to then decide how we show up in that relationship, in that dynamic, how we help them, how we support them, how we grow them? And yeah, it's one of the things that I come back to again and again. And when I work with people, they tell me all of these assumptions and these, predictions and guesses and estimations that causes all of these stories and worries and anxiety. And it's like, have you asked the question? Have you listened to the answer to then decide what to do next? And often that's the piece that isn't happening enough.
Okay. There's many ways we can take this. But let me start by going, so are you saying then that is leadership isn't hard? Is that just the shock headline? Because the double click is we need to listen more.
Yes.
Because I reckon there's plenty real experienced leaders out there that would go, Tash, it's hard.
It's complex.
It's hard, right? Like parenting's hard,
Oh yeah, I'm a parent. I feel that.
right? So don't tell parents that parenting isn't hard. But and I'm wondering if, and that's okay because we, in a world of noise, sometimes we need to make this headline that's not always true, but it's true enough for people to go, hang on a minute. So I get that. Because you could probably argue if it is about listening, which I believe it is in part, that's on the people side.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's a broader definition of leadership because does listening really help us sell more, make more profit, develop more product? Yada, yada, yada.
Doesn't it though? Because if we're not listening to our customers, if we're not listening to the market, if we're not listening to the feedback that we get from our products, are we going to sell as much?
Look, there's no doubt. What I'm saying though is, hence this is, leadership isn't hard. I would reckon if you're listening to your customers, if you accept a principle that one size fits one, each customer has a unique perspective on the world. Each person has a unique perspective on the world. That's hard. So that's kind of what is that
Yeah.
just the kind of entry point into, we just need to listen more.
Well, listening is how we identify each of those people, right? And we understand what is going on for them. Now, when I say it's not hard, it can still be complicated, but often the complication and the complexity we put on top of it is because we're not listening enough, right? So if we even think about our customers or our stakeholders or our investors or, our people, yes, we've got lots of different voices, which can make it more complicated, right? So which one do we weight more? But ultimately, if we're not listening enough, we don't know which one to weight the most or which one, has the most struggle right now. So it is, I'm definitely not saying it's not complicated, but it's made harder because we're not listening enough, right? We're making a lot of assumptions. We're making a lot of, and obviously we need to predict and we need to forecast and we do need to estimate to some extent. But if we're asking better questions and genuinely listening to those answers, we can make things so much simpler. And one of the definitions I came across around listening and truly listening from Oscar Trimboli is having the willingness to have your mind changed. When we're truly listening to someone, to people, to a group, and we're willing to have our mind changed, we're actually absorbing what they have to say. We're taking it in and going, okay, is that, where does that fit with my belief? Where does that fit with my opinion? Where do I need to potentially shift what I think or what I do or how I do something in order to best respond, in order to best solve this particular challenge? But often what's happening and what I've seen through my experience is we're listening, but we're not willing to change our mind. We're not willing to change what we think based on what we are hearing, which then again adds that layer of complication because it's like, yeah, I'm listening or I'm hearing, but I'm not actually willing to take it on board, which then adds that complication. And again, it's not that everything has to be taken on board, but are we genuinely listening enough so that we can potentially change what we're doing to create better outcomes, more success, better results, whatever it might be?
When you've asked that question of people, are you willing to have your mind changed? What have they said?
A mixture.
Wow,
So
I'm surprised if someone's even denied they're not.
Yeah, I've
Because my
definitely had,
expectation was if you ask most people, are you willing to have your mind changed? Most people would go, yeah, of course.
yeah, and I think that's the I know that's what you want me to say
Yep.
answer.
Yep.
But in one-on-one coaching in particular, I can usually get to a place where it's like, well, are you actually willing to change your mind on that? No, because I think that this is right. Okay, I'm not saying that you're not right, but is there a willingness to think about it differently based on where someone else is? Right. And I've definitely had people say, I'm not. And I will put my hand up and say sometimes I'm not willing to have my mind changed because we do get really rooted, right, in what we think. And I mean, we're not going to go into the whole thing of politics, but politics is probably one of the ways,
No,
right?
we're not.
But that is one of the arenas where it's like
Yeah.
we see that really blatantly of I don't want to have my mind changed or I'm not willing to have my mind changed because what I believe is what I believe. But that seeps into how we show up in other areas as well.
And the counter that being willing to or being seen to change my mind is weak.
Mm. So if I change
I
my
think
mind,
it's
I'm weak. Is that what?
I think it's as much about
Mm.
that possible or apparent correlation than necessarily I'm not willing to change my mind.
It's that fear, right? What's someone going to think about me if I change my mind?
Right. Yeah.
And this comes to identity, right? And this is a thing I talk about a lot in leadership as well, is if I change my mind, what does that mean about who I am now? And this isn't all just about like the mundane decisions, but these can be some of our more deep rooted, beliefs. It's if I change my mind on this, something that I've been telling or talking about, this is what I believe, this is my values. But if I now change my mind, yeah, what will people think about me? Does that fundamentally change who I am? That fear of no longer belonging, right? And that's the human psyche coming in of if if this potentially changes how I'm perceived, I may not no longer belong here, which is a huge
Yeah, there's
risk.
definitely that. What struck me, and even just the question, are you willing to change your mind? I reckon most people would see that as binary,
Mm,
as in yes or no, good or bad. And so I wonder if many people in having that question asked of them would think of it as, of course I'm willing to have my mind expanded, which is a kind of different frame on, are you willing to have your mind changed? Because I think many people see change as binary, as in, well, if I change, then what I thought was wrong, now I'm thinking this is right. Which for
mm,
many people, given our history and biology, is, well, I'm not going to do that. Certainly not in front of you. Certainly not in front of you who you report to me, and I'm responsible for your REM and responsible for yada yada yada. And off you go.
mm. Yeah, and framing means a lot, right? Like,
Mm,
and I think maybe the power of the word willing, it's not are you going to? It's like, are you going to change your mind? I think that comes to the yes or no. I think the willingness, if we actually pay attention to that word, is am I just willing to? It doesn't mean I have to. It doesn't mean that I'm going to,
mm,
but am I at a point where I'm willing to listen for the potentiality of it to change?
mm.
And we can play with both of those, right? Like, am I willing for my mind to be expanded? And there's so much nuance to this, right? And I think this is a mindset skill that we need to develop as people is can I play in the nuance? Can I play in the gray of I don't know. Like I don't really know. I don't know what I think about that. I don't know what I believe about that. Do I have enough information to potentially change my mind? Do I have enough information to consider that? And yeah, like we do come back to binary because it's that fear versus safety and it's, yes, no, black, white. But
Yeah.
developing that skill set of can I not know and be willing to play there? And that can be
Well,
uncomfortable.
that's a very different perspective and question for people.
Mm,
Most, I think, would say, yeah, of course I am, but we know they're not really good at that. A connection I've made, Tash, is I think it was a video clip that I've seen online recently, which kind of resonates and makes sense from Chris Voss. I don't know if you've heard of Chris Voss.
I think his name sounds familiar.
Yeah, he wrote the book Never Split the Difference, which is a
Hmm.
thoroughly I thoroughly recommend, one of the best books I've read on negotiation. He's the guy that literally negotiated hostages' lives,
Mm.
right? So not, incredible. And he shared this interesting take on influence and impact. And rather than when you call someone up, ask, is this a good time to talk? Answer yes. He's suggesting, is this a bad time to talk? The answer
Mm.
being no. That no, getting a no was more conducive to influence than getting a yes, which is like, whoa, really? That's kind of counterintuitive. So I'm taking that as, I wonder if instead of, or in addition to, are you willing to change your mind? We could ask a question that gets a no response, like, do you always have a fixed view on things? No.
Mm.
That if we
Well
play the
then.
psychology of that, then maybe there's another way in, and then you and I or others are armed with a couple of options. So I haven't dug into the psychology of it, but I just it it provoked me in thinking, yeah, I would always ask, is this a good time to talk? I
Mm.
would never ask, is this a bad time to talk? Seeking a no. And so I'm wondering here, are you willing to change your mind? Well, obviously, yes. Whereas the counter question might, and we seek a no. I wonder if that causes any difference in planting seeds around listening more.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, kind of my part of my brain goes, would that actually create more defensiveness structuring the question that way? Like, do you always have a fixed mind, like a fixed view or a fixed mindset on this? Because with some of the people in my circles would be like, no, I don't.
Right. And I think that's his point.
Yeah.
Right. So they're defending the position that you want them to take, as in, of course, I'm open to it.
Yeah, that's
But it's
interesting.
probably easier to take an open, well, of course I'm willing. I want to be seen as a competent person. I want to be seen as a nice person. I'm being polite. Of course I'm willing to change my mind. But almost
Mm.
defending the fact that you don't have a fixed view. Again, so I haven't dug into the psychology, but I just thought it was a really interesting, again, spicy headline
Mm.
to get us to look into maybe there's another way. And not an or, but maybe there's an and to that.
Yeah. I love the and. I try really hard not to say but, something, but. It's like this, and, because there is always multiple ways, right? And I think it comes back to the intention, right? Like, what am I wanting to evoke in this conversation? And then using my question or my language to open that door. Because again, like what my intention is may not be the way that it's received, right? So I might be wanting to go kind of
Really?
slither in this way, and they're like, nope. And so, yeah, I really like that. Just playing with openness versus closeness and how you can use that to open up, lack of a better word, but like to open up the conversation. Interesting. Yeah.
And maybe it appeals more to my bias, where my bias around questioning is often to provoke.
Mm.
I want them to kind of be shaken a little bit by the question. No one's asked me that before.
Mm.
In order to open the mind up to possibility rather than probability. And sometimes my bias would be sometimes that needs a bit of provocation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's often what happens in coaching, right? People come to you to work on something and you're asking those uncomfortable questions that the people in their life, their friends, their family aren't asking because they're too close to it. And I get that all the time of like, oh, never actually been asked that question before. I'm like, great, let's go there. Let's play. Let's see what happens.
Mm. So if that's a spicy, a medium spice, what's the kind of three chili spice opinion you have about leadership?
Oh, gosh, it's my three spice. Is this the spiciest?
Yeah, is there a spicy? Do you have a spiciest? I mean, obviously you don't have to reveal that.
No, no, no.
Knowing that if this was a private conversation, then you may, but knowing that it's been recorded.
Yeah, like I think one of the other, is it a spicy opinion? we're still like, I mean, I don't know if it is a spicy opinion, but I think I'm still getting very annoyed at the people who get put into leadership positions, positions that have a lot of sway and a lot of influence, that I don't want to say the wrong people, the just the not best fit people are, are finding
I
their
think
ways
wrong's a
into
better
those.
word.
Yeah, like, okay, if we're going to be real spicy about it, yeah, like the wrong people are, getting put into those positions because of tenure, technical experience, uh, who knows, and it's having a huge detrimental impact on the people that need to work with them, because they're not equipped with the emotional intelligence, the self-awareness, the social awareness, the compassion, the willingness, I guess, to be in the gray, to not know, to be uncomfortable, to do the hard things, which is necessary in leadership. So I don't know if that's my 3 chili spice, but yeah, I think still too many wrong people are getting put into positions that have this level of power.
It would certainly, in the work that I do, I'm guessing it's the same with you. The Peter principle is alive and well. And for those that are listening that don't know what the Peter principle is, it's this idea that most people, or some people, are promoted to one level above their competence. So I'm really good at this level, and I'm seen as better. So I get to this level, and that's just one level too much. But I'm never going to do that. And so what you're talking about, I think, is when we get to that level of one level above, or sometimes more, of our competence, we don't have the social awareness, self-awareness, compassion, listening, willingness to reach what's required at that level.
Yeah, it's that we're relying on the technical, right? We're relying on the like that technical capability versus it's the, like, what would be the other term? Like social capability? No, like, I don't know if that would be the term. It kind of just sounds like I'm making it up right now. But yeah, that, because there's like the other side of that argument is there does need to be a level of right confidence, because as we're moving up, if we're going to talk about ladders and hierarchy, as we're moving up there needs to be a level of competence. However, when we're getting into positions of leadership, when we're playing that influencing game, really, it's no longer about technical competence. Is how do I leverage the other human skills? Like, how do I leverage the whole human to get what we need? How do I leverage the whole human to drive the results, to create the success, to, achieve the KPIs and the objectives and whatever, versus how do I just tap into them technically? Because when people look at leaders, it's like, I don't need you to tap into me technically. I need you to look after me as a person. Like, I need you to support me, who I am as a person, so that I can leverage my technical skills to be able to do what I need to do. And I think that's often the part that's missing when people are moved up. One, because they don't actually have a drive to be great people leaders, or to be leaders. It's just, there's nowhere else to go, so they just need to go here. And then the impact that has.
Can you grow that?
Absolutely. And
How?
that's the willingness.
How?
The
So
willingness.
let's say at one level, at the kind of ego level or the surface level, I'm willing to grow as a people leader. I'd love to get into this. We know it's partly about identity. How do you support someone that wants and is willing to do that? And what's the work I have to do on my side to make that mindset shift?
Well, the kind of the identity piece that I work through, there's like 4 aspects of that work, which is it's the self-awareness. It's the knowing of the self first before we step into that external, into that team dynamic. But one is like knowing what you value. So often leaders are stepping into those positions, they don't actually know what they value and what's really important to them, and what they want to reflect through the way that they lead, through the way that they show up. So really understanding that piece. The second piece is their strengths. So what are you really good at? What are you really strong at? Because I genuinely believe we shouldn't be spending a lot of time on our weaknesses. We should be spending the majority of our time on our strengths and leveraging other people to close our gaps where our weaknesses are. And then, so really knowing that, so knowing where our zone of genius is. The third thing is our perspectives. Like, how do we think? Getting really honest with, how do I ideate? How do I think? What are the opinions that I hold? What are the perspectives that I have? How do I interact with other perspectives? So really understanding how it is that we think, understanding our mindset. And then the fourth thing is the impact. So what impact am I really wanting to have as a leader? And this is the part that the best leaders I know are really clear on that impact. They know how they want to serve other people. They know what kind of influence they want to have. They know what kind of environment they want to create. And they connect to that. And then all four of those aspects come together into what I create as the identity statement, which is, who am I choosing to be as a leader? So how do I connect to my values? How do I utilize my strengths? How do I leverage my perspectives? And then how do I use that to create my impact? And then through that, they then create that roadmap of how they're going to show up as a leader. And that through that work, it highlights, where are the fixed thinking? Where's the fixed thinking? Where are the blocks? Where do I not connect to what I'm doing, the organization that I work with? That's that values piece. And then what is it that I need to do in order to create the impact that I want to create? Because a lot of people, when they actually flesh out that impact piece in particular, and that's the sense of purpose, they recognize, oh, okay, well, if I want to have this kind of impact with this team or this department or, this community, whatever context it's in, it then starts to highlight, okay, these are the skills I then need to develop. I need to develop the skills to have courageous conversations. I need to develop the skills to give feedback in a meaningful way. I need to know how to set boundaries. I need to know how to practice compassion. And then that starts to shine a light on, okay, well, if I want to be this kind of leader, if I want to have this kind of impact, I need to develop these skill sets.
Okay, well, let me play devil's advocate for a second. I really value structure and order because I'm an engineer. My strengths are logic, it makes sense, order, tensile strength of two pieces of metal holding a bridge together. How do I think? Very clearly, very logically, very structured. And the impact I have is I can get things done that are built to last.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I want to change that?
You wouldn't.
But I want to have a different impact. I want to
So you
show
want to
up
have
as someone else.
okay. So when you say you have I want to build things that last, I would then dig
Again, so
into,
I'm devil's advocating that
oh
position.
yeah,
I can't really answer your question about what do I really think and feel because I'm acting at that. But
yeah.
that's kind of where I'm going in terms of when you have someone that has a relatively, in their world, successful career life position to date,
Mm-hmm.
based on their levels of awareness that got them to that point. How do they shift that?
Well, firstly, like, do they want to? So if someone was
My
in
ego
like,
tells me I do.
okay, but ego has no place in leadership, right? So
No,
if,
really?
yeah, because ego is, how do I maintain my status? How do I maintain my face, my mask, my, yeah, like my status, my stature? It's very externally focused. Whereas like if we're talking about true leadership, it's, how do I be of service to other people? And that isn't always going to mean that I look the best, that I'm the one that gets all the success, that I'm the one that is acknowledged the most. It's, how do I create a space for my team to be able to do that? So if someone has those strong technical capabilities and they're moving up into that position, the first question, and this is also something that's missing in leadership development when people get moved into those positions, is, well, why do you want to come here? Why do you want to step into, it's like, oh, and the answer might be, well, there's nowhere else for me to go. Okay. So let's look, you said I'm really strong at structure and order, like that's what I value, how I think, like very clearly, very process driven. My strengths are being like analytical. I don't know, can't remember what you said, but be like, okay, great. So what are then the strengths of the people in your team? How can we understand what they bring to the table? And then how do you utilize those strengths to then create the outcomes? So like that team, if we're talking about a team with an organization, will be driven by specific objectives, right? Like the things that they need to deliver on. It's like, okay, so using your strengths alone, how would you deliver on those things? Okay, well, I'd be able to do this and this and this. Okay, where are the gaps? Well, I have gaps in this and this and this because, if I'm very structurally, if I think very structurally, I might struggle with seeing the bigger picture and how things fit together in terms of X, Y, and Z. So then who in your team has the ability to do that, has that as a strength? And then you work through the mindset of, you've built your career up to this date, being an individual contributor. To succeed here, we now need to leverage other people, because your skill set isn't going to be the only thing that's going to drive the success moving forward from here. And so the work that I do in terms of mindset is holding value to what you bring. It's not about diminishing that, taking that away. And then it's about expanding that to go, your contribution will be even more valuable when we bring in the contribution of the rest of your team, when we utilize the strengths that everyone else has to be able to create the results that you need as a team. And so if there wasn't a willingness to do that, if there wasn't a willingness to step outside the individual contributor mindset, then that tough conversation needs to happen of, is this the position you really want to be in? Are you able to step out of, it's me and my contribution and the success that I create to, it's me that creates an environment for my whole team to contribute, because that's now what success is. And I think that's often the conversations that aren't happening. Specifically when I worked in professional services, it's individual contribution accelerates growth, right? You're technically capable. But they were often the teams that were the most, maybe not say most unsuccessful, but they weren't the teams that were driven the most. And the conversations that weren't happening was, this position isn't the best fit for you because of what you're willing or unwilling to do. And so there's the coaching that can happen to try and help someone move through that. But at some point, coaching only does so much. And there has to be a decision that someone needs to make about, is this something I want to do? Is this something I want to expand in, using our language from earlier, or not? And sometimes that can be hard. That sometimes can be hard to make that decision.
How long does it take
to learn that, to develop that? Is that what you're asking?
There's no answer to the question, really. I'm interested more in then perhaps trying to help people understand, given all that you've said I have to do, right? If I'm that leader and I want to do all that stuff, how long does that take?
Your whole career. Because and this is also the other challenge, it doesn't end, because you could learn that skill set to the extent that supports your team, the immediate team that you have, but then you move to a different team and you have a whole different set of people. You have a whole different set of people that have different strengths. Then you have a whole different strategy that you're working towards, which means that we then need to evolve the way we use those skill sets. So you can learn the base skill set of doing all of those things, like how to give feedback, how to build a strong team, how to have meaningful conversations, how to set boundaries, how to set expectations, all of those things. You can know the base framework, but how it's applied will depend on the kind of people you have, the kind of organization you work in, the subject matter that you're working with. And if to come kind of full circle back, it's like that can be what makes leadership hard too, right? Because when we step into a different team or an organization, it's like, oh, okay, everything that I applied in my last role, the base level is the same, but now how I integrate it, how I now apply it with these different set of people is different. I need to evolve. And then that comes to listening. How am I listening to learn about these people, how they work, how they like to be led, to then support them in the best way? And so there is no binary of it'll take you 2 years and then you'll learn how to be a leader. It might take you 3 months to learn the skills, but then you're spending the rest of your career applying them in different ways, refining them, and I think that's the growth mindset that we need to bring. Because even if we think about, like, even using podcasts as an example, right? You can podcast for a year and you're like, I've learned all the skills of podcasting, but then you have to adapt your skills of questioning and interviewing and things like that, depending on the person that sits in front of you and the way that they show up and the way that they talk. And so you're constantly refining that skill set. And if we're not willing to do that, we're going to stunt, right? And that's when our leadership becomes less impactful, because we're now no longer willing to shift and change and to adapt the way that we show up depending on the people that are sitting in front of us.
Tash, in your experience, is it different for men than women, or vice versa? Is it harder or easier for either?
I think the different skills might apply differently. So I think for women, we're probably more wired for compassion, empathy, that connection, maybe that social awareness. Like we're more adept to like taking more notice of, okay, oh, that person's reacting this way, oh, that person's body's doing this. So I think in terms of the emotional intelligence piece, maybe women can strengthen that skill set a lot better. But then in other aspects, men likely have more confidence to give feedback, to set clearer expectations, to do more of that, what's the word I want to use, more of that direct stuff that's needed. But I would also say I've met many women leaders who also do it really well, right? But they've also, again, harnessed that skill set. So I think that there are some aspects that women are stronger, maybe more naturally, and men are stronger, maybe more naturally. But then again, it's all nuanced by environment. What kind of environment are the men and women working in? Does the environment make it more conducive for men to show up a certain way? Does it make it more conducive for women to show up a different way? And that's where we need to we're kind of diving into more organizational cultures. Like, what's the culture that we're driving? How does that impact the people that are there and the way that they show up, and the way that impacts the way that they show up? So I definitely think that there is differences, and I think that those differences don't have to limit us in terms of how we build those skills and how we use them in the way that we lead.
I'm not sure there's an answer to this question. I'll ask it based on your experience. So that kind of role play that I suggested, this engineer, blah, 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 very, would you, given what we just said, and I know there's lots of assumptions that are not always true, would you, if that person was willing to be coached and have a coach, would they be better off with another man or a woman, assuming they're a man?
Ooh. Oh, I don't know. I think it would depend. Interestingly, I have a very 50-50 split with men and women clients. And the majority of my men clients are far older than me. And I really found that interesting when I started seeing that trend. And I would say, based on the feedback that I've gotten from those clients, that they appreciated how different my viewpoint was, how different my perspective was, the way that I could question the observations that I had. So I would say that I think I would say it's a level of coachability. If someone is super coachable and they want to be uncomfortable and they want to be asked the hard questions, go with someone that makes you feel quite uncomfortable. So if you're like, oh, I would feel most comfortable with like a man who's maybe about the same age as me, who's had the same career, you're going to possibly get a lot of what maybe you're more used to in terms of your interactions. But if you are someone who wants to really shift the way that you think, get someone who is completely different to you, who makes you slightly uncomfortable. not unsafe, uncomfortable, right? Like there's a little bit of resistance of like, oh, can I? I remember starting coaching with one guy. He was in his 50s, and I started talking about emotions, and I just saw this like a visceral reaction, because I talk a lot about emotions and leadership, and there's a visceral reaction in his body, and he was like, I don't think so. And I was like, we're going to. So here are some emotion cards that we're going to start playing with, and we're going to start talking about it. And a year later, he would come to a session and he would immediately talk from an emotion place first. So this is what I felt this week. I had this interaction and this is how I felt about it. I'm like, great. Right. So yeah, I'm always an advocate of, where do I feel most uncomfortable? And is that going to help me get to where I want to go? And I don't like being uncomfortable. I'm very like, I like to know, I like to plan, but then I also recognize that I'm only going to stay the same if I keep doing the same and talking to the same people. And so the only way that I'm going to become better at what I do and to learn the skills that I need is to get into spaces that make me feel really uncomfortable. So, and I don't know if it's the same like for women, if the answer would be the same of like, go to a man. I think it would really depend on what is it that you're really wanting, and what are the certain skills and traits you want to develop, and who is going to best serve you to do that. Whether that is man or woman, whether that is age or not, or whatever, it's get really intentional about what it is that you really want to get out of it, and then make that decision based on that.
Thank you. Is there anything that shaped your willingness to be uncomfortable? And or do you have any practices that continue to remind you of the value of that?
I think one thing that shaped me the most, I got made redundant or disestablished in
You had your
2015.
future freed up for you.
Yeah. Future Freedom Friday. Yeah, I was made redundant, and in the disestablishment meeting, the CEO was crying. And I just remember I was like, what is happening? I'm meant to be the one crying. I'm meant to be the one that's really upset by this. And I wasn't chosen for the remaining role against someone who was almost exactly the same as me. She was another woman. She was the exact same age. She had the exact same experience. And I just couldn't understand why she got the leg up over me.
Yep.
And after that moment, I just decided, I was like, I'm not letting anyone dictate my value ever again, in terms of the value that I give, the value that I bring, because I really had to fight for that job when I shouldn't have needed to, even when I got the job initially. And the next job that I went for senior positions, and I got $20,000 more in salary, and I literally had to fight for the money I got beforehand. And I decided then, and like I went for jobs that I didn't think I could get based on my past experience, but I went for it anyway. And I learned how to sell myself. I learned how to, articulate my value. And I decided then that I was always going to do at least one thing that made me uncomfortable, at least every month, or at least with something significant. And that's since served me since having a business, because everything that you're doing is uncomfortable when you've got your own business. You're selling, you're marketing, you're sending proposals, you're pitching, you're doing all these things that you have no control over, that's so out of the norm of what you've ever done as an employee. And I always go back to that moment. I was like, I'm never going to feel that way again. I'm never going to feel that small and that out of control. And one of the practices that I have, I don't know if you show the video to these podcasts, but I've got what's called a wins jar. And it's just a gherkins jar that I've cleaned out. And I've got Post-it notes. And every time I do something that's uncomfortable, that's scary, that I've had a win, like I got a yes, or, something's been approved or whatever, I put it in here. And then when I have those moments where I don't want to do it, it's too hard, what if I fail, what if it's a no, I look at that jar, because it's physically on my desk, and I'm like, I did all those things, so I can do this thing. And another practice that I have, it's this idea that I came up with called the Courage and Confidence Bank Account, which is, there are so many moments across your life that you've done things that took courage, right? And courage is the presence of fear. It's not the absence of fear. Like, you have to feel scared and do something, and then that's when you build your courage. And when you come to a moment where I can't do this, it's too hard, I've never done this before, I talk to my clients about tapping into your bank account, going into your savings account. It's like, you've had all those moments, just transfer some of that into your everyday spending account, and you're going to spend that courage today for this moment. Because all of those things that you didn't know how to do, you've never done before, you did. And it's all stored up in your psyche. It's all stored up in your brain, but we don't think about those things because we have that recency bias. It's like, oh, I didn't do it in the last 3 weeks, so I've never done it before. Or we think only I have to have done this exact thing in order to feel confident. It's like, no, you do scary things all the time. Otherwise, what are you doing? Otherwise, we're just coasting and doing nothing, right? So those are the two big practices that I use to do things that are uncomfortable. You know, even like pitching to podcasts, like pitching to speak at conferences. Like, I don't know what people are going to say, and more often I'm going to get a no, but another no gets me closer to a yes, right? Like, and that goes back to what you were saying, like, go for the no. That's another tactic that I've heard from people. It's like, set the goal of number of no's you're going to get.
Yeah.
You know, because it means that you're asking, it means that you're going for it, it means that you're doing something. And I think that's important in leadership too. You know, we're often just waiting to know everything, or to be the expert, or to get it right, or to guarantee the outcome. Like, it's not how it works. You know, we only get the information if we do it.
I wrote recently about this inflection point, that when we come across a situation or are asked a question, or we're in a scenario where internally or externally my response is, I don't know. At that inflection point, what do we do? If on one side we kind of go, shit, panic, oh my God, fear, but I need to know, you know, yeah, versus, wow, I don't know. Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. I don't know. That's interesting. And just that inflection point takes us off on two very, very different journeys. Multiply that by my tenure. No wonder I respond the way I respond.
Yeah. Yeah. And I talk about, I don't know, as one of the biggest credibility builders you can use. It's one of the biggest underestimated, underutilized credibility builders we have in our pocket. Because if we say, I don't know, again, there's the willingness to be curious. I don't know. Yeah. And I mean, we can always decide, right? It's like, I'm either going to go into fear and panic and get caught up in the negative, or yeah, using it as that opportunity. And that's what I always did across my career. It's like, I don't know. Actually, I've never come across this particular incident before. I worked in HR. Like, managers come to me all the time and be like, you must know this. I'm like, absolutely not. You're weird, and I've never come across this before. But I'm going to go and find out. I'm going to go and ask some questions, figure it out, and then I've learned something. And yeah, it's a powerful phrase that I don't think we utilize enough, and we don't recognize the power that that phrase can have and where we go next.
Yeah, I agree. Tash, do you have a spicy opinion on imposter syndrome?
Yes, it's not a syndrome. It's not a diagnosis that we get. I used to call it a syndrome. I'm not going to lie about that. You know, Valerie Young is one of the early speakers on imposter syndrome. I've come, since running my Thriving New Professionals program, someone in the program said, this is not a syndrome, and we can't call it that, because it negates real, like, you know, it negates other things that people get diagnoses for. And I said, oh, absolutely, I'm going to dive into this, and I'm going to learn more about that. I still believe it exists, but it's a thinking pattern. So I talk about it as imposter thinking. It's a train of thought that we can get stuck in of, I don't belong here, I'm going to get found out, I didn't deserve to be here, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But we have the ability to change the way that we think. We have the ability to change and short circuit our brain in terms of its thinking spirals. And so I do believe that the train of thinking exists, because it does, you know, there's research shows that it's higher in women, and I have a whole view on that it's because women are more likely to talk about it than men. They're more likely to say, I feel those things, than men do. And
so it could be higher in men.
oh, I personally reckon, I'm not a statistician, so I don't do research, but I would say that every single person on the planet has experienced it at some point in their life.
Yeah.
It's just whether it becomes what's the word I'm looking for? Debilitating, like whether it becomes spiraling, where people just ruminated on it, over and over again. I would say 99% of people have experienced it across their life. And yeah, there's so many factors to it, but ultimately, are we recognizing the right things enough that helps to quieten those thoughts? And that's our wins, our proud moments. Like, that's one of the things my wins jar is for. The other viewpoint I have about imposter thinking is that it's a good thing. And a lot of people will be like, no, it's not. It holds me back. And it's like, that's just a perspective. It's like your inflection point. It either holds us back or it expands us. So the way that I use imposter thinking is, if I feel like an imposter in this moment, it means that I'm doing something different.
Comfortable.
It means that I'm doing something I haven't done before.
Yeah.
If I didn't feel this way in this moment, I would be doing something that I've done 1,000 times.
Yeah, it's a good reframe.
And so, it's like I use it as my stretch. It's like, if I'm not experiencing imposter thinking or some self-doubt at some point, like, I'm just coasting. I'm doing nothing stretchy. I'm doing nothing different. And then what are we doing? And so that would be my spicy opinion. Maybe that's one that I need to talk about a bit more.
Well, again, I observe like you do. I was about to say sadly. I'm not sure it's a sadly thing, but I don't know what it is. Many more women seem to claim it. But a bit like you, I'd have a position that probably as many, if not more men, actually have it, wherever it is, whether it's a thinking or not a syndrome. And yeah, I think the more important thing is that's another reflection point. Do you use it to drive you and kind of go, yeah, I must be feeling this because I'm doing something different out of my comfort zone that I'm not used to, yada, 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 versus, oh my God, I shouldn't be here. Therefore, I'm going to clam up and become a smaller version of myself.
And if you shouldn't be there, you wouldn't be there. If I'm going to get pretty like black and white simple about it, it's like there's moments where we experience it the most, right? We've just taken a new job or we've just stepped up, in our responsibilities. It's like, I shouldn't be here. It's like, then you wouldn't have been. If someone didn't see that you had some sense of either competence or capability of potential, you wouldn't have been put into that position unless you lied through your teeth that got you there. Then yes, valid, feel that way because you shouldn't be there. But with all the people I've coached through imposter thinking, when we dig into experience, skills, all of those things, I'm like, you have exactly what you need to be here. It's just, how are you thinking about it?
Yeah. Tash, I'm conscious of time, so maybe a couple of last questions from me. Given your position on the role of and the impact of leadership and all the kind of spicy opinions you have about it, if you were able to dictate and mandate a specific criteria that all people in a leadership position have to have, they have to pass that test, do that thing, experience this, have this mindset, whatever it might be, that would lead into some of the things that you're talking about. Probably not all of the time, everywhere, but at least it's a kind of like stage gate. You don't get to become a leader unless you've done this, have this, said this, experienced that. What would that be?
How would you measure this? I don't know. It would be 3 things. Self-awareness, a high level of self-awareness. You can tell me your strengths, your gaps, where you need help, where you struggle. Like a really strong sense of self-awareness and a willingness to continue developing that self-awareness, because it's not a stagnant point in the sand, line in the sand place. Social awareness. You have a high level of social awareness. That's the ability to read the room, read other people, read between the lines, because people aren't telling you everything. You need to be able to be notice, right? Pay attention.
Assume they're not.
Exactly. Yes. If you're going to assume anything,
Yeah, assume they're not telling you everything.
assume you know
Always.
nothing. And the third one would be compassion. And I think compassion encapsulates the listening aspect we've spoken a lot about. And I think also, does compassion sit within this generous interpretation or generous assumptions? Like, if you're going to assume anything, make it generous. And I think that does connect to compassion of, I have a lot of leaders come to me, I've got this problem person, I've got this problem employee, I've got this difficult person. I'm like, are they though? Like, do you know that for a fact? If you were being generous, what interpretation would you give to them? What interpretation would you take?
Mm.
If you, I mean, there's so many more things, but I think fundamentally those three things give such a great grounding place for leadership to build from there, because it's all about how you connect to yourself and know yourself, and how you connect and pay attention to other people.
I like that. Might also spark the thought. Do you think then? I know we're speculating, right? Is that something I can do when I'm 18, pass the test, I'm a driver until I'm 70, and then at 70 I need to do it every 2 years just to recalibrate because I'm getting older, I'm getting a little bit less, my vision's going, I can't. So I'm using the in a car driving test as an analogy. Is it the sort of thing that you pass once, or should this be a decade per test? Should this be an annual? Should this be a monthly? I'm just interested. You have a view either way?
Regularly, absolutely. This is not a, yep, I'm self-aware, I have social awareness, I'm compassionate at 18, because trust me, I don't think any 18-year-old has that. Just thinking back to me at 18. But I would say, like, at the minimum, significant transitions. At a minimum.
Yeah,
Significant transitions would be changing jobs, changing significant positions within a company if you're not changing companies.
yeah.
Even just in life, significant transitions, like, getting
Definitely.
engaged, getting married, having a child, buying a house. Like, oh my God, all of the times that my husband and I had to like recalibrate, at each of those transitions. And this goes down to like the essence of who you are changes all the time. Like, we're not a stagnant person, and our level of self-awareness develops and changes. I would say that can decrease as much as it can increase, because we can get quite fixed in the way that we think about things potentially. And so our level of self-awareness can decrease with that. But I would say at a minimum, significant transitions, at a maximum, why not every year? Why not, we do New Year's resolutions every year. We, set, if we're thinking about companies, we set goals every 3, 6, 12 months. Like, why are we not checking in on those things? And this is something that, I talk about with my clients is, your one-on-ones need to be spent talking about the person and what they need, what's going on for them, because the questions that I propose in my resources is like, what strengths are they utilizing? What challenges they're experiencing? If they were to resign tomorrow, what would be the reason? What do they want to focus on for the next 3 months? That develops self-awareness. What challenges are they experiencing with other people? That develops social awareness. Right. So again, and all of those are just micro reflection moments where this doesn't have to be some training you have to formally do. These are just some prompting questions you can ask yourself, have people ask you. And as a leader, you can do this for your people, right? Create these pockets of moments where they can check in with that.
So a final question from me, and I'm going to come all the way back to the start. I'll lead off with you may or may not be familiar. I quite enjoyed the Legacy book by James Kerr about the All Blacks. And what's always struck me is this idea that a better person is a better All Black. If I reflect on my own kind of thoughts around even just our conversation, I could definitely be a better human if I was more generous with my assumptions. So thank you for that. But if I ask you, what are you willing to have your mind changed about?
That I don't know anything about leadership.
That's a great answer.
But and I gave a talk on Friday and at a conference, and I talked about the huge generational shifts that we're going through right now, probably the most significant generational shifts, absolutely, with Gen Z and Gen Alpha coming through. And one thing I said is, leadership is about now acknowledging that we know nothing and being willing to learn everything. And I think, I have opinions. I spark out a lot of stuff, and because I want to create opportunities. Like, tell me I'm wrong. Like, tell me I don't know something. Tell me I'm not thinking about it as fully, because how else are we going to learn those things? And so, yeah, I'm willing to have my mind changed that I don't know nothing about what I do. And if I can share one piece of value to one person in one conversation, then that's the best thing that I can do.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you for a very generous answer.
You're welcome.
Tash, it's been
Now
lovely.
that's going to be played over the internet.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Why should I hire you, Tash? You said you know nothing. Hang on, hang on. I only said I was willing to consider the possibility.
Yeah, that I know nothing.
Yeah, yeah. Tash, look, thank you for your time. Thank you, probably more for your generosity and thought and willingness to have your own thinking turned on yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for
And
challenging
again,
me.
it's probably the biggest compliment anyone that hires you could probably give you. So where do we find out a bit more about you? How do we get in touch if people are interested in engaging you? Where do they go?
Yeah, so tashpieterse.com. I will type that out, and that will be written in the show
We'll put it
notes.
all in the
People,
show notes. I'm
yeah,
just
because
gonna,
people will get my last name wrong.
yeah.
So yeah, tashpieterse.com, and I'm most active on LinkedIn and Instagram. So at Tash_Pieterse on Instagram, and then just Tash Pieterse on LinkedIn. Yeah, super. And then my podcast, Lead with Less, where I love to talk, as you can probably tell, because we have not had a 30-minute conversation. And yeah, I share a lot of my thoughts and views on there as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. What a great conversation.